Thank you. Take your seats. Take your seats. Okay. Okay. Today we're dealing with what we can say a controversial subject. Controversial subject. To some, a taboo subject, and to some, a topic that is so hot is that they're trying to avoid sitting next to each other. However, as scholars, we have always to face these topics. We can't allow the public to discuss them with emotions and not come in and do our part. Uh, since the subject is already hot, and I know panelists here are prepared to come and talk to us, I don't mind adding more fire so that it gets hotter. I'm wondering, from our myth and of creation and everything, was sex ever anticipated? How come even in the Bible, God created Adam? Yes, Adam, before he thought of adding someone there. In one of our myths of creation, they created two men. Then one day, they wanted to harvest firewood from a tree. One of them climbed the tree with an axe, and the other one remained down. While up there, the axe fell and chopped off the manhood of the one who had remained behind. And that's how we got a woman. So I would like you to say this. If it weren't for the accident, I want you to repeat that. If it weren't for the accident, okay, it means minus that accident, you will not have had a woman. And I don't know what was anticipated there. Whether they were just going to have two men and no woman. Was there going to be any sex or not? Since did we start conceptualizing how sex should be done? Since did we define what it means to have sex? Since then, how have we created taboos around this subject? What is African way of perceiving all this? Ladies and gentlemen, today we want to confront this subject, talk about it. As the song used to go, let's talk about sex without blinking, without hiding our faces, just in the open, so that people can see where this subject takes us. So I will want to start being comfortable in this house after being welcomed. And we have the person in charge of the Human Rights Center for the Center for Human Rights and Peace, Dr. Waka. Please, welcome. Oh, for the benefit of those who do not know me, I'm Mingichu Abenda from the Department of Literature.
Thank you. Thank you, Bwana Kimingich. Thank you, Dr. Kimingich. Let me welcome all of us, all the guests from far and wide, from around the academia. I can see our professors are here. I can see members of the academy. I can see several bodies represented here from the government, from the social media, the UN agency at least were represented. Many other groups are represented, including ourselves. Let me begin by recognizing the presence of our good human rights advisor at the UN office, Dr. Lee. Please welcome, among others. She represents a huge body of men and women who are interested in peace and justice. And of course, peace and justice will always take us to human dignity. So what am I supposed to do? A very simple task. My job is very simple. But I don't want to go to this topic the Kimingichi way. I want us to look at Africa. It's a very complex landscape in terms of knowledge, history, sociology, among others. Even geography. I think part of the exploratory processes were because Africa was not navigable. Once upon a time, the fathers of African liberation did not like the colonial guys. So they invented something called, and I'm using the word invent intentionally, they invented something called African socialism. But they say that they want a socialism that is not related to Karl Marx, because Karl Marx socialism was the antithesis of capitalism. But there was just one characteristic that they were working on. They argued that Africa did not have classes. Evidence, there was no concept of classes in Africa. So we went on and on and on. The socialists became the most serious capitalists. Today, that topic is hushed. We do not know whether we have African socialists or socialist Africans. It is a debate that we still not actually clear where it began and where it is heading. If it is not dead, I'm not sure about it. Equally, the argument on sexuality, it is divisive, but it is shrouded in taboo. Anything that looks sophisticated for Africans must be alien. That is a very interesting way of looking at reality. If it is simple, then it is African. But we have a word for it in anthropology. I'm sorry to talk about anthropology. A better way of talking about it is to say it is primitive. But to say it is primitive simply means it is simple. So if it was simple, if sex was that simple, then we would have said it is African. But when you complicate it, it becomes non-African, it becomes foreign. And they always add the word ideology. The moment you add ideology, it becomes sophisticated, it becomes tough. So it is spoken in serious and harsh tones. However, we as academia, we are just worried. Are we on the right path? I think we need to interrogate. The business of academics is to take part in public discourse. We want to participate in this debate. We want to understand. We want to clarify meaning. We want to clarify issues. By saying that we want to clarify issues, I'm not saying we have the last word, but actually we may have another last word, as Stefano Leong put it. So this is not the last word. It's only the beginning of the word. We want to engage this debate. We want to see, should we talk about African sexuality or should we talk about African sexuality? That is a question that gave birth to this discussion. A part of the discourse was born out of simple talk where we sit after work. We sit in some room. Actually, they call it a common room, but they add another adjective, senior. So if it is a common room, it is for everybody. But when it becomes senior, it becomes very serious. Again, you know, that is an alien concept. Senior common room was never in Africa. We used to sit under trees. So sitting in a room is another serious thing. So we discussed it and we said, why don't we meet in a room and discuss it other than senior common room? Today, the journey begins here and now. I want to imagine that the discussion will give birth to more issues, more clarity, more analysis. We regionalize. Do we define sexuality on the basis of geography? What are African experiences of sexuality? Is there evidence that Africa was that in Africa we can only talk about man and man, man and woman, mother and father, in the sense that we talk about it in the English sense, the language that was betrothed to us by our colonizers? I think I don't want to take a lot of your time. I want to hear from you. Part of the discussion is that we are recording this information. We want to see. We shall listen to it. What is your thought? What are your thoughts? What do you think? And what do others think? Online, we have panelists who will share with us a legal dimension. Online, we have panelists who will share with us a theological dimension. I don't want to say what I'm going to say, but please forgive me. Having Kimingich having said what he said, remember in Africa, we didn't have the Garden of Eden, but we have always wanted it to be the honors of the origin of humanity. So it is claimed once upon a time, the Garden of Eden was in Turkana. But remember, man was created first. Then because he was bored, so God created, he didn't create. God gave him the woman. Some people have argued, was it an afterthought? If it was an afterthought, then what was the intention of God? Now, again, the idea of God is shrouded in mystery. God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But you see, I teach logic, so those things don't make a lot of sense to me. We don't want to interrogate that. We shall have another session for that. Thank you very much, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Waka. He said he didn't want to go Kimingichi way, and the moment he finished that statement, he said, long time ago, that's the Kimingichi way. Uh, so, after enlightening us and bringing in the other issue of whether we have African sexuality or sexualities, and I always remember Bill Clinton arguing that to an average American, to have sex is to have intercourse. What is the African concept of sex? Does this always involve intercourse? Or what does it involve? And intercourse in what sense? I can see this session has those two terms interconnected, discourse and intercourse. Now, we will have to move to the next session, and I'm inviting our facilitator and our main speaker today to come forward, and I'll hand over there to the facilitator to take over and take us through the session. Kathleen, we are vacating our seats. Hello?
Thank you, gentlemen, for that elaborate and interesting intro to the reason why we're here. And so I hope to inspire everyone else to join us in thinking the way they're thinking, really unpacking the idea of sexuality, and with the title here being LGBTQIA++. So we are into all those terms, and we shall be trying to understand what they mean to us in our seats, in our corners, based off our cultural realities, and so on and so forth. My name is Kathleen Anangwe, as you heard, Department of Sociology. Sexualities are really at the center of what sociology is all about. In the beginning, it was under the area of deviance. So anybody who was not doing what we thought they ought to be doing in the spirit of Adam and Eve, we thought they were deviant. They must be from another planet. But we have quickly come to learn that they're basically here with us. We are some of those people. And so there is no deviance right there. Already you can see the direction I'm moving, because sociology really is inclusive in the last century. So we know sexuality is a biological process. The meaning of sexuality is cultural, so it's variable. We know from the Kinsey experiments that sexuality is on a spectrum. So there is no male or female. Those are the seeds I'm planting in your minds right now. And so in my panel, my esteemed panel, I'm happy that we've got anthropologists who we shall be wrestling with when we talk about African culture. What is African? What is culture? We have got theologians, as we were told. We have got legal experts who will let us interrogate the legal basis for what we do, what we say, where we are, and why we say what we say. And then we also have, I'm just looking across, we have the main speaker, Professor Akumu, who will tell us exactly his view of the sexual minorities are all about. And then we have ourselves, who are also experts in our own right. And that is what I want to use to include all of us. I can also see a few clergy in the group here, and I'm happy to have them. Note, I've not called them theologians, I've called them clergy because they're also representing their congregations and the spirit of their congregations. So, welcome to this colloquium on African sexualities. And it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce Professor Owiti Abiero Kakumu, uh, who is a professor in real estate in the Department of Real Estate Construction Management and Quantity Surveying. What would a surveyor know about sex? University of Nairobi. Apart from studying the policy environment, dealing with the development of property, he's concerned with the political economy of liberty in general. I myself would have asked him to begin explaining to us where bedrooms ought to be in order for sex to occur. But that's what I shall engage him with after this session. And what's the African way of putting those bedrooms wherever they are? So, Professor Kumu, please, Professor Kakumu, let me be honest with the name. Professor Kakumu, please feel welcome. We will listen to your speech, and from that presentation, let us draw some insights and questions that we shall share during the plenary season. I will introduce the other panelists when we get there, just for relevance. So let me not steal Professor Kakumu's spotlight. So, Professor, you're welcome.
Good morning. Yes, as you have heard, my name is Kakumu, and I deal with built environment. But today, I said I could also talk about things which are done, some secret things which are done in the built environment, in the open. So, by the title of my presentation, Perception of Sexual Minorities, Drawing Lessons for the East African States, as you'll see in the program, and I'll talk about a few topics. I'll give an introduction to the subject, and then I will ask the question, what is natural sex? And then I'll make you answer it. Then I'll discuss state policy on unnatural sexuality. Then we'll also get some philosophical insights, especially from Plato, Sigmund Freud, Karl Heinrich Ulrich, as a German activist, and there's also a journalist whose work I love so much, called Brandon Ambrosino. These people, they are at the forefront in intellectualizing what is sexuality. That is according to me. So, okay, they're saying I sit here so that I can appear in the images. uh, by way of introduction, I've told you I come from built environment, but in the built environment, we also deal with axiology. Axiology is a branch of philosophy concerned with ethics and aesthetics. So ADD Yes, a lot of that going on. So that was has enabled me also to learn about things, concepts of philosophy, and what is going on there. So as she said, I also describe myself as a student of liberty because uh, liberty is the beginning of all values. So I'm a valuer by profession. I can attach values to buildings or quantities, but also without the liberty to do that, then I will not work as a valuer. So liberty is the beginning of all values, and all value judgments should be based on rationality. That is my belief. All value judgments should be based on rationality rather than emotion or rather than irrationality. And I believe that I'm just giving you my reason why I'm here. I believe that highest value of all values is value of knowledge, and so I am a lover of wisdom. I like intellectualizing things. So what is the issue today? I'm going to look at the conceptualization of a natural sexuality in East Africa. What do actors in this field think about uh, a natural sexuality in East Africa? I'm doing this because we have problems. We have what is called state-led homophobia, where governments are harassing people they think are practicing homosexuality. There's also the issue of lawfare, where lawmaking is used as strategy as homophobic strategy. So law is used as strategy to harass those who are deemed to be practicing homosexuality. And also, there's also a politicization strategy where people bring something I call sexual nationalism, and they start saying that homosexuality is a foreign thing, it is not African, and all that. So they politicize it. You remember when there was a case when the Supreme Court decided that the council for homosexuality is legal, even Raila crossed rank with the government and, and said all of those things, these things are an African. So our question is it true that these things are an African? So the issue is important to us because homosexuals are at risk of violence. Homosexuals are at risk of discrimination. Discrimination comes with health risks and stigma. Advocacy groups are at risk of violence, and advocacy groups face state harassment, and this is leading to human rights violation. So the question I'm asking, what is the conception of a natural sexuality? Two questions. The second is, what are the implications of this conception for East African states? The objective is to provide a rationalized awareness on homosexuality to the public, to the general public, and to special actors, e.g. policymakers, so that they can understand it from a rational point of view. Even if they are doing whatever they're doing, they must have justification for doing it. And if they fail, but we have done our part as intellectuals, we have informed them and given them a rational path for action. So what is unnatural sexuality? So I said I'll ask you that question, I'll make you answer it, but I'll answer it, then you can then question my answer. So I'm saying that homosexuality has been there since time immemorial. Evidence of its practice is abundant in the Bible. In ancient Greece, pederastic education was the main form of education, where a mature man would pick a young man and mentor him into society, but also the young man would pay using sexual favors. And that was the practice before they started sophist education, where philosophers now came and started teaching people for free or for alms. So evident is also there in Greek mythology, where it is practiced by gods, including the main Greek god known as Zeus. And I want to give a quote here from somebody called Greg Johnson. So Greg Johnson is saying there is no question that homosexual behavior was not only tolerated by ancient Aryan peoples, it was considered normal, in some cases even ideal. It was ascribed to the gods, Zeus and Ganymede, and lauded by poets, philosophers, and historians. It is hard to maintain hateful Jewish attitudes towards homosexuality if one really understands and appreciates the greatness of classical pagan civilization. So queer bashers are in the grip of Jewry without even knowing it. So there's, according to this person, those who they get this idea from Judeo-Christian tradition, where the Jews are against the practice of homosexuality. And there's biblical evidence. From here, we go to biblical conceptualizations of homosexuality as a natural arises from the Jewish hatred for the behavior. There are many instances in the Bible that illustrate the abhorrence of homosexuality. So the first mention occurs in Genesis 19 regarding the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah cities due to homosexual sins of their inhabitants. In the New Testament, there are also instances of Pauline epistle to the Romans, that is Romans 1, 26, 27, where it writes that for this reason, God gave them up to degrading passions. Their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural. And in the same way also, the men giving up natural intercourse with women were consumed with passion for one another. Men committed shameless acts with men and received in their own persons the due penalty for their error. That is Romans 1, verses 26, 27. Another one, letter to the Corinthians, says, do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Fornicators, idolaters, adulterers, male prostitutes, sodomites, thieves, the greedy, drunkards, revilers, robbers, none of these will inherit the kingdom of God. So sodomites there represent male homosexuals who are considered as sinners. In another one Timothy 1, verse 9 to 10, it says, this means understanding that the law is laid down not for the innocent, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the godless and sinful, for the unholy and profane, for those who kill their father or mother, for murderers, fornicators, sodomites, slave traders, liars, perjurers, and whatever else is contrary to the sound teaching. So here, this one now declares sodomy illegal. The other one declared sodomy sinful. This one is declaring sodomy illegal. And in Jude 1, verse 7, it says, likewise, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which in the same manner as they indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural lust, underline the word unnatural lust, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. So then here it is saying that homosexuality is punishable by eternal fire. If you commit it, you face punishment. Then there's also a theoretical, philosophical side from Immanuel Kant. Kant he formulated something called categorical imperative, and in the second categorical imperative, he formulated something called formula of humanity. And in the formula for him in humanity, he says that act so that you treat humanity in your own person, always as an end and never as a mere means. And the end here means humanity. So whatever you do which is not serving humanity is wrong, according to Kantian ethics. So, according to Kant, there is a class of duties to oneself. Duties to oneself as an animal and moral being. So you must think of yourself. What is your duty as an animal? So your duty as an animal and a moral being is nature's purpose. Kant says that impulses of nature having to do with human beings, animality, nature aims at one, his self-preservation, the self-preservation of man, the preservation of the species, the preservation of his capacity to enjoy life on the animal level only. So here they expect you to first behave as an animal who only does sex for conception. Then again, you should behave like a man now, who is not an animal but somebody who is moral. So that is the take from Kant. So from those kind of beliefs, we can come to colonial laws in East Africa of the Penal Code outlawing unnatural acts, which they have borrowed from the Bible, they have borrowed from Kant, but we will see where it actually came from in the philosophical world. These laws were bequeathed by the British colonial masters. The British were informed by Judeo-Christian thinking passed down through the Roman Empire. But homophobic ideas in philosophy originated from Stoicism, which is a school of Greek philosophy of virtue ethics, or naturalistic ethics, which emphasize that virtue consists in a will that is in agreement with nature. So heterosexuality is not an African concept. It did not exist in pre-colonial times. It is actually a Eurocentric word. We did not create anything. I don't think we have, it is an African language which has the term heterosexuality. In Tanzania, section 154 of the Penal Code says any person who A, has carnal knowledge of any person against the order of nature, B, has carnal knowledge of an animal, or C, permits a male person to have carnal knowledge of him or her against the order of nature, commits an offense, and is liable to imprisonment for life, and in any case, to imprisonment for a term not less than 30 years. That is Tanzanian law. And they got it from 1945. I'm told it came from India, and they still apply it. It's still in the penal code. In Uganda, section 145 on unnatural offenses says any person who has carnal knowledge of any person against the order of nature, that is A. B, has carnal knowledge of an animal. C, permits a male person to have carnal knowledge of him or her against the order of nature, commits an offense, and is liable to imprisonment for life. So they are the same. They read the same. They came from the British. They are just the same. So in Tanzania, you can get life imprisonment or at least 30 years in prison. In Uganda, it is just life imprisonment. In Kenya, section 162 of the penal code is on unnatural offenses. So it says any person who A, has carnal knowledge of any person against the order of nature, B, has carnal knowledge of an animal, C, permits a male person to have carnal knowledge of him or her against the order of nature, is guilty of a felony and is liable to imprisonment for 14 years. So at least Kenya, we are a bit sympathetic. Kenya is 14 years. So, yeah. So that is what it is for Kenya and for East African states. So I'll go to make further explanations. So we want to get some insights from Aristophanes, insights from Plato's Symposium, and the chairman is warning me that I have 8 minutes, but I said my speech will take 1 hour. That was the agreement when I decided to come here. So you can keep your 8 minutes. Yeah. So I want to tell you a story. This is a very funny story, and it's the story which made me come to address you today. We were just sitting in the senior common room. Then I told the organizers this funny story when we were having a drink. Then he said, "Why can't you come and tell a comical story?" It's from some guy he's a comedian called Aristophanes, who lived a long time ago, about 600 BCE. So they are saying that they were in a party or a symposium. Symposium is just like a cocktail where you have eaten, or after here, worker can take us to a cocktail and then we start drinking and talking. So they were making speeches in praise of Eros. Eros is the god of love in Greek mythology or Greek theology. So they're saying that according to this Aristophanes, people were making very serious speeches. Very serious speeches. People are trying to compete on how to make their best speeches. But Aristophanes is a comedian. Then he just say, you people, you don't know this thing. He starts by saying that in the beginning, there were 3 genders. There was the male gender, there was the female gender, then there was the androgyne. Androgyne is somebody who has both genitals. Or both, so as a gender, he has both sexes. So he says that those days, human beings were round like balls, like the globe, and they had double limbs. So human beings had 2 faces, 4 hands, four legs, and two genitals. So if you were male, you had two genitals, back and front. If you are a female, you had two genitals, back and front. And if you are androgen, then you had a male genital, maybe front or back, and a female genital at the back. So then these guys, these beings, they were very powerful because they had double limbs, and they are so strong. And now they could move very fast with the four hands, and they were threatening to climb up to heaven and then defeat Zeus, the god of the Greeks, according to Greek theology. Then God called a council, and God asked, "Now, what should I do with these people? But I like them. If I kill them, then they'll be nobody to worship me. So, what should I do with them?" Then this he discovered that what the best thing to do is to cut them into half. So then you have two hands, one face, one genital, and two legs. So he cut them into halves and promised that if they continue misbehaving, he'll cut them into another half so that a man will be hopping with one leg to move around. You have to hop on your one leg only. So that's now it was giving now is a way of saying the origin of sexual orientation and the origin of the genders. So then he says that after God did that, then when it splits the male gender, then this one now we had two males, we each with now one genital. And if you split one female, now you have two females with each with one genital. And the androgen was split, and so you had one male and one female. So now they're saying he's using this to explain sexual orientation. So he's saying these people all the times they long to go back to their original self before the damnation. So when you see a man pursuing another man for love, that is a natural thing. He wants to go back to the former self, the divine self that it was the primordial, the origin of man. They want to go back to that body. If you see a female body pursuing a female body, the same. They want to go back to the original self. So if you see a female body pursuing a male body, that one is the androgen, the ancestor of the heterosexual. So heterosexual love came from the androgen. What you call male homosexuality came from the male ancestor, and female homosexuality came from the female ancestor. So, what is the moral of this? The bottom line, the thing, the intellectual value of this is that he's saying that all love are valid. And all love, whether they are homosexual or heterosexual, they are natural. So it debunks the concept of unnatural love. So I think that is well explained. I'll also touch a bit on Sigmund. Sigmund Freud. Freud also is a good guy. He is the father of psychoanalysis. And in 1935, there's a woman who wrote to him. A lady wrote to him and said, please, I want you to treat my son who is homosexual. Then Freud wrote back to her, and this is what Freud said to Mrs. X in 1935. He said, homosexuality is assuredly no advantage, but it is nothing to be ashamed of. It's no vice, no degradation. It cannot be classified as an illness. We consider it to be a variation of the sexual function produced by certain areas of sexual development. So many highly respectable individuals of ancient and modern times have been homosexuals. Several of the greatest among them, including Plato, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, these ones were confirmed homosexuals. So it goes ahead to say it is I just lost my notes. You'll bear with me. Hmm? And work has timed me out. So you can continue. Worker is a dictator. Let me just wind up then. So he said, he told the woman, by asking me if I can help, you mean, I suppose, if I can abolish homosexuality and make normal heterosexuality take its place. The answer is, in a general way, we cannot promise to achieve it. And they say that in a certain number of cases, we succeed in developing the brighter germs of heterosexual tendencies which are present in every homosexual. In the majority of cases, it is no more possible. It is a question of the quality and the age of the individual. The result of treatment cannot be predicted. So even doctors cannot reverse homosexuality. That is taken from Sigmund Freud. And Freud did not view homosexuality as pathology. He projected a complex understanding of heterosexuality. So Freud now said that heterosexuality develops from something called Oedipal mechanism. He says that from a psychosocial point of view, that every child wants to kill the parent of the opposite sex and then hmm, kill the parent of the same sex and then make love with the parent of the opposite sex. So that is what marks the development of heterosexuality. So a man will have sexual feelings right from the day of birth by coveting his mother unconsciously, and the girl will also have heterosexual feelings by coveting the father unconsciously, and at some age this thing gets resolved, but the DNA sticks in. Heterosexuality sticks in you. And Sigmund says that if that Oedipal system fails, then it is not your mistake. It is a path of growth, but it fails for some people. It works, it works for many others, but it fails for some minority. And what we should understand is that you are not responsible for that failure. That is the gospel according to Freud. So I don't know whether I can stop there, but I still had more materials. Huh? Okay. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Owiti. If you were to continue with the stories like the one of Aristophanes, I'd have liked to hear that one. I thought the only comedians were Mr. Churchill and Mr. Bean. So now we know there are others who are cracking jokes in that area. I think what we are carrying away from that very intellectual discourse is a lot of history based on the Greeks. These are not things that are just contemporary, but they've got a historical background, and that context will be given by the other panelists that I will introduce. But I want us to, as we reflect on the issues of, I'm just getting my notes, state-led homophobia, that is what Professor introduced, lawfare, homophobia, those strategies by the law, politicization strategy, where we are all now coalescing against those who are of alternative sexual orientation. And I like the fact that he said we are here to intellectualize as well as ask questions. So don't feel that if you don't talk about the Greeks and the gods, the god Zeus, you're lost. I like that he said homosexuality has been there since time immemorial, but then we'll get more insights from the anthropologists and the theologians. I hope you noticed the pejorative language that is used, that is vile, illegal, and natural. The colonial turning point right there, where these laws punish alternative orientations. And I'm trying to bring in the word of orientation there because sexuality encompasses all the ways in which people experience and express themselves as sexual beings. We are seated here as sexual beings. The study of sexuality considers that range of expressions. And therefore, in the end, when he says that it is not as unnatural as we imagine it to be, we will be asking questions around whether it is the state's mandate to tell us what is natural and what is not. And I like that he concluded that you cannot kill that feeling. So perhaps those who are saying, I was born that way, including Lady Gaga, who sang that song, maybe we should have played it, or at the end we shall play it. We can also use that as part of our understanding of what sexuality is. So in Kenya, we are aware that alternative sexual realities exist. And so to that extent, I will be bringing in my panelists. You can see me trying to place things in different places and hold them. I was asking for a table previously, but it's not there. Our esteemed panelists are going to be beamed in. They are listening to us. And so I begin by introducing so that we can have an understanding of whom they are. I'll introduce Dr. Dorcas Chebet, who is an expert in human sexuality, sacred texts, and human dignity. The Reverend Dorcas is a senior lecturer, Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Pwani University, the head of Christian Option, and a board member of the undergraduate studies. She holds a BD in theology from St. Paul's University and from the Protestant University in Netherlands, and a PhD from Stellenbosch in South Africa. She's a research fellow at Stellenbosch. She has written her own publications, including, which we shall read about, Sharon's Blood Through Judges, The Sacrificial Lambs in African Women's Lenses, and then Mother Earth for Equity. Her research interests are the Hebrew Bible, cultural hermeneutics, gender, the religious climate change and food security, queer theologies, law, religion, sexuality and sacred texts, and human sexuality and human dignity. So she brings us back to the idea of human rights. That is Dr. Dorcas Chebet. Dr. Dorcas, please feel very welcome. Allow me to go to the next one. So I introduce all of them and then we shall start interacting with them. The next panelist is Christine Nkonge. Christine is an alumnus of this university. Her expert is the rule of law, social justice, good governance, and minority rights in Kenya. Christine is the executive director, Katiba Institute, having joined that institute in 2014. Before Katiba, she worked at the International Justice Mission and has been an adjunct lecturer at our Center for Human Rights and Peace, University of Nairobi. She graduated and has a diploma as well and was admitted to the bar in 2008. She holds an LLM from the Central European University in Budapest, from where she graduated very recently. My third panelist is Godfrey Owino Adera, a PhD candidate. He's an expert in theologies of gender and sexualities in Africa. He's at Ridge University in Amsterdam. He's a priest in the Anglican Church of Kenya. I look forward to listening to his sermons. And a supporting minister of the Cosmopolitan Affirming Church, Nairobi. He works at St. Paul's University as a graduate assistant and has done a lot of work in women theologies, Christian theologies, and the title of his PhD, which I will share, is The Christ Figure in Her Stories, a tripartite perspective on African women, lived and oral Christologies, gender, sexuality, and health. That is quite a mouthful, but he's going to do some work there, which I think he's busy with. And then perhaps the one with the longest bio is Dr. Shilabuka Kamati, an expert in African culture or Africa, culture and sexualities, research fellow lecturer in anthropology, gender and development studies at Institute of Anthropology, Gender and African Studies at the University of Nairobi. And if I was to sit here and read his accolades, we will spend half the day here. So I'll just tell you, I will allow him to show off when he's talking, during that time when it comes about. So I will perhaps begin by setting the stage with Dr. Shilabuka to just lead us into a historical understanding of where we are at in discussing African sexuality. So if you can just briefly give us some background, and then I will move to those who are online to key them in.
Good afternoon. My name is Kamati Shilabuha, lecturer at the Institute of Anthropology, Gender and African Studies. And my concern is that we talk about sexuality as if it's standalone issue or standalone idea. We need to link sexuality to two pillars, one that starts and then leans on another. The first one is culture. Culture as defined by the father of anthropology, Edward Bernard Tyler, is a very complex whole that encompasses many things, and culture having many things inside the big umbrella has one very important pillar or institution called gender. Then, and as we move away from gender, we come to sexuality. So when we discuss sexuality, we must in rises. This was a see know that point that you know rises, but the way you mean that takes learning mechanism to go to so that as we discuss sexuality, we are going to be to the and then you need that because this are the foundations of sexuality. And the first of all is the line according to this from particular origins that does it as the first sexuality from the perspective from that woman and not even the shuffle. From that is determined of sexual issues within society. So this was very interesting to that because of some individuals were experienced over from the classes. That was a use. As I was saying, section. I will not worry about the environment in essence, and also sensitivity. So Something else is that in Africa, we talk about the Instagram concept. It is a Muslim. Because Africa is a whole site of almost 5,000 different cultures with different perspectives on the gender and the sex. And we naturally have the emotional gender is not as one to the rest of you. African also, some of them have more than 20 genders. And one of the signs and in the same gender identity will be on the whole and destiny of the society. So when we sexuality, for example, in some cultures, for the fact that change the realities, we should have to do it or something like that. And we should change us. Because these will some African cultures are sexual. For years, they don't have Nigerian or wanting and this will be one of the issues now second because from 7% categories of gender personally you have those also the devil hours. Which are seen as million. Society will not the know. And that's a different of the right. So when we look at those things, that produce sexuality that is much more complicated and studied here and from here to try to get actually cultures is sexualized. Because it is you need to get there. And you know, which put out as a salute or someone as you know. So if you are last year, gender overalls, or some are adapted. If you go through so many simple social organs, as you know, and I've seen some cases where we are told that African women in some cultures, for example, married by the woman, that is classified as many relationships. It's because there are not feelings that are the kind of not this is a door of engaging. The woman has a possible to have children, and she has resources where psychologists in the family was allowed to have a little woman from vision concept of work and feeling and thinking to have children with her life. So as most husband and woman and want to have a such relationship with her wife. But the right things also are sharing entertainment and cameras and also kind of lesbian relationship. However, the number as a source and the man was quite practice and maybe because of such a change it's dying out. Among the Basel in the Sociological industries, they have sexual where women in the segment men support themselves so around the minds away from women and in the purpose. Whereas actually just the abuse. So for not to allow it to continue to sexual activity. And this is where student resources And as a why was a man saying, very opportunity, not particular workplaces. We was also sexual activities for of time, when just been simply currently, shorts, dresses, house, someone special level was around so I saw eating the doors, and now the oceans are also short. So we have children, we're still on this God is to be tonight. But writers who are annually receiving from situation as a man who makes houses to engage in impressionable sexual intercourse among themselves. So these are some of the things that to this. And sometimes we took this as someone that so short membership solution. And to move on how sexual and okay, so some African cultures are also short. Now, the some concepts to also have the disclaimers. And somebody was showing us that give us a list of that will describe the sexual memory. And I was surprised that the cultures listed was in line. And it was subservient. In my marketing, that is a man and a woman have changed. A man who don't know, not a man who has a good no. When they not use it like an issue. So that doesn't have to well. That's the word also for passes. And this why is this structure to the website was that as supposed to be after the but I don't know as so as people talking to these discussions, we so to be very careful. But when we the most concepts that we know in something to influence something so as the moment the system students civic practices to this knowledge let's make we should get into knowledge and just for because of very controversial relations, those for that and also and they will have the justice election and those and this is the skeptic issues. Was not the special of many relationships. And with most of just typically to tackle. The system of operated the patronage to be for the season social which was a church that the rituals of the rituals and really home. The rituals and nature God. And the moods that activities to the issues is the nature of African versus. And what I'm saying is that this discussion is very good. To change and textualize it, points, to make sure that we are the right processes related to Jesus Christ. Point. If you don't have the as a little the God, it's a good is how we want to make it. So, among the social business, as our chicken.
Thank you, Dr. Shilabuka, for actually giving me the context I was looking for. I wanted to be African, and you have now appetite in terms of what the context of the citizen is all about, getting at African sexualities and the traditions. You've given us Maasai, Somali perspective, and I don't think it's true. But was now it's link that to the Hijra idea. We shall also be talking about that. The theological perspective, yeah? And so there's Dr. Chibet is available. Dr. Chibet, would you for us just some context in terms of history, how the theologian fit into this discussion of African sexualities? Where do we start and learn from? Dr. Chibet, can you hear us? Give us a minute while we try to bring her in. Because I want her to be able to explore the idea of how does religion fit in. I think Professor who started us out quoted some Bible verses which are interested in the New Testament. We always try to say that the Old Testament not to take away from what the Old Testament did, but we can see the New Testament being quite hostile towards homosexuals, even though as we sit here we need to think about African sexualities as more than just sexuality. Like that is what Dr. Shilabuka was getting at in that right where. Can you kindly unmute and speak? Dr. Chibet, I think I heard a sound. Can you hear me? Yes, now we can hear you. Good to see you. Very welcome. I hope you have our program. I was asking the question, give us some theological context to the study of African sexualities, or to the conversation about African sexualities. Doesn't look like she can hear us. Okay, so I can continue while we're trying to cue her in. I'm thinking, yes, Nikisa? Yes? Another panelist, Christine Conde, can you hear me? Christine Conde?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, lovely. So, Christine, good morning. It is morning here. Please welcome. Perhaps you can give us a legal understanding of African sexualities. I know I'm really interested you around there, but African sexualities using a legal framework. Where are we at? Is it held? Is it going in the direction or directed with conversations such as this one? Welcome.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, Chris.
Yes, you are audible. Okay, thank you. A very interesting conversations going on in the room. Although the mic seems to be very far from us, so if I repeat anything, kindly forgive me. So I will take the legal perspective as I've requested. And I know there's some previous speakers who mentioned about the fact that homosexuality or more to be more specific in terms of legal phases and legal terminology, sexual contact between persons of the same sex was criminalized in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. You will find actually that for African countries that had were mostly colonized by the British and a bit by the Germans and Italians, would have within their laws, stemming from colonial legacy, laws criminalizing homosexuality. But for countries that were colonized by the French, you do not find this in the legal frameworks. So, in my last analysis, which was about half of the countries in Africa, have laws criminalizing homosexuality, and about half do not. Kenya, because of its colonial past, together with Uganda and Tanzania, definitely therefore inherited colonial laws from India, from the Penal Code in India, which was then brought here into Kenya, then inherited provisions that criminalize acts against the order of nature and acts against the order of nature between male persons. That's how the law is phrased. So how has the law developed since the colonial laws were enforced in Africa? Of course, for the countries that do not criminalize homosexuality, this is not an issue of concern. And the intriguing thing then for persons who spoke as they did before me is to look at whether those countries that have never criminalized homosexuality still have a definition of African culture. Because the African countries and cultures have been going on, African cultures have been going on and thriving, irrespective of the fact that the laws there do not criminalize homosexuality. So it would be good to see that kind of discussion between African cultures for those countries that do not criminalize homosexuality vis-a-vis the ones that do not. And whether those countries that do not criminalize still maintain an identity just African culture, and what that means for them under African values and traditions. So in Kenya, I'm sure then we have this new perspective brought in to the colonial laws imposed during 1920s, all the way to, I think, the last amendments to the Penal Code was in the 60s. So in Penal was happening for us after the introduction of the tentative constitution. The tentative constitution was a very rights-based, rights-rich constitution. And it requires that laws need to be looked at afresh based on the new developments we have and the new rights traditions we have introduced under the 2010 Constitution. So the 2010 Constitution recognizes culture from each level. And you have issues of the rights of individuals and communities mentioned several constitution, including the preamble. And again, one of the voices that people always bring up in litigation working around this issue is the fact that a board is mentioned in the preamble to the Constitution, which today reflects religion. So the British culture is recognized, the right to religion is recognized, and the right to expression is recognized, the right to privacy is recognized, and the right to discrimination and equality and equity is recognized. I mention this rights because in this type of discussions, these are the main rights that are mentioned. And again, in Kenya, we have another perspective, which is the right to sexual and reproductive health rights. Which is mentioned in our constitution. So, look at what is becoming fast and then I mention very briefly others. So, in South Africa, as a delivery of movements in this discussion for decriminalizing same-sex sexual contact, to recognizing equal marriage. So, South Africa is an outlier in Africa because it recognizes equality marriage. Anyone can get married irrespective of their gender, both biological or self-identified. But it's not an issue in South Africa. Now for Kenya, and please tell me when my time is running out, I'm not really sure how much time I had. In Kenya then, we have these colonial laws and we have the 2010 Constitution. And I think the people who spoke before have said human sexuality around the world has universal features. That people who identify as sexual minorities have existed and will exist within the human population. And they have existed for time immemorial. And I guess for those who use religious texts, that's why they are mentioned in the Bible, meaning they existed even then. And they continue to exist. So the issue then in Kenya is that we've had sexual minorities that existed during colonial times, and existed during post-colonial times. So what do we do in relation to what has happened after 2010? And I will use two cases that have gone through the courts to give a bigger definition of what that means to human rights. So we have the first case which was filed in 2013 by EG, EG versus NGO Coordination Board, the non-government organization coordination board, and for others. This is a 2015 case. You can find it on Canada among the Colonial website. And it's a case that was begun in 2013, and it was around the rights by EG to register a non-government organization to advance the human rights of persons who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex. And he wanted to call the organization, he had a number of names, but in naming the names lesbian, gay, transgender, and intersex appeared in his proposed names for registration of the NGO. And when he provided the application to the NGO Coordination Board for registration, the NGO Coordination Board rejected the names because first you apply and see whether the names are acceptable. The NGO Coordination Board actually need to check whether the names are acceptable because they could be other organizations that have similar names. So they looked at these names proposed for registration, and within one of the names subject here appeared, and then NGO Coordination Board rejected these names on the basis that they were advancing activities that are criminalized by law. And they use sections 162 and 165 of the Penal Code that criminalize this conduct, as I've mentioned before. So that is interposed against the order of nature. So that can capture both female names and then activities against the order of nature between males, which then such as what we call as sexuality. But other one as well, culture as well behavior. So it shows differently. So the NGOs coordination board for the register these things. Whatever you're trying to propose is criminalized by law. EG disagreed with this and then went to court on the basis of this issue. The issue was I have the right as a Kenyan citizen to register an organization, formally registered an organization that promotes LGBTI activities in relation to human rights activities. So the activities meant were to monitor human rights violations for the LGBTI community, to look at service delivery for the LGBTI community, and to look at other human rights violations and threats experienced by LGBTI community. So they went to court, and the court looked at a very narrow issue because this was an issue of registration on the basis of the right to association and on the basis of non-discrimination. The legal provision on non-discrimination in Kenya, that is Article 27 of the Constitution, it says, you should not discriminate against another person against prohibited grounds. So sex, gender, culture, religion, which lists a number of grounds as you should not discriminate somebody on certain grounds. But at the end of it has that it's not exhaustive because it indicates that these grounds include this and others. And EG was arguing sexual orientation should be ground to be included. under this list for the basis that you cannot discriminate somebody for the basis of sexual orientation. And if therefore you include it as a ground, it means that as long as it's still prohibited, then his reason for creating an NGO would be accepted. And also was looking at the issue of equal enjoyment of life, which is very prevalent and Article 7 of the Constitution. Citizens should have rights of enjoyment of life. And then on the basis of the right to association, which indicates any person with him can form an association of any kind. And so that was the basis on which he went to court. And the court agreed with him on the basis that the face the questions for determination by the court was very interesting. Because first I wanted to answer the question, is an LGBTI person a person under the Constitution? If they are a person under the Constitution, then every clause in the Constitution that says every person has this right to live in LGBT community as well exercises those rights. And we're looking at it as a biological person as well. So of course that was a very easy question for the court to answer. It says every person includes a person who identifies as LGBTI. The second issue was for the right to association, and the court said the right to association cannot be limited by presupposing someone will commit a crime. The court said which is to claim prohibited was very clear in the penal code. It is sexual contact. So by identified as LGBTI, and adults are not engaging in any sexual conduct, so why should that perception that I'm likely to commit a crime be used to limit the right to association? The court found that that is not a logical limitation, that was not a reasonable limitation, and said the criminal law should keep you when it is needed and when a crime has happened. But it cannot be used to say that you are likely to commit a crime to stop somebody from associating with others or similar identity, or for sympathizers for other people who want to support their cause. On the right of an issue on discrimination, for those indicated that sexual orientation should be a ground that is added into the grounds, the grounds for discrimination, and that allowed sexual orientation to be treated, and because of that, I called that this organization should be registered. And I just went to the Court of Appeal. You have some time to look at the Court of Appeal case. I wrote results touch on the right to religion, and whether religion can be cited as a law to limit race. Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, African traditional religion, can any of those religions be used as a source of law and on that basis be used to limit rights? And the first thing, you cannot cite religion as a source of the law, because the right to religion in our constitution also allows somebody not to be religious. You have the right not to prescribe to any religion. You have the right not to have somebody else's religion imposed on you. And that's why you will find in our constitution at Colonial that there shall be no state religion in Kenya. So the government is not allowed to govern based on any specific religious ideology. Kenya is liberal in that sense. And so the court said because everybody has the right not to practice a religion and not to have somebody else's religion enforced on them, we cannot cite religion as a legal text to limit rights. And because of that, the court allowed the registration. So the Court of Appeal decision, and this is the same decision that the Supreme Court confirmed earlier this year in March. There's been a lot of discussion on LGBTI rights in Kenya since March. I think it's February and March when the court released its decision. And this comes from this same discussion I've been having this 2017. And the Supreme Court agreed with the High Court and the Court of Appeal in affirming that sexual orientation should now be ready to the Colonial Constitution to save the rights to rights for someone who is of sexual orientation. Christine, I want to ask you, the court was asked to review its decision. Can you agree with the Colonial? And vote refused. So that is short stories. The countries of cultural look is the one again with Fiji and others, which was looking at trying to get the court to straighten out sections 162 and 164 from the Constitution. They are trying to get the court to say sections 162 and 165 very contrary to our current institution on the basis that they violate the right of privacy. But whatever they do as consenting adults in the privacy of their home, the state has no business regulating that space. And if the state regulates that space, it is intruding too much into the privacy of individuals. The second one was on the right to health, that criminalizing same-sex sexual contact denies LGBT people access to healthcare because of the stigma attached to it. It exposes them to other violations, including in employment and in housing. Because once people discover their status, then sometimes landlords have required them to repeat. And sometimes they've lost employment when the status is disclosed, and then this causes them to be blackmailed on the sources. And the final one was also the issue of diversity and equality. The judge do not agree with the petitioners in this case on the basis of the best position on marriage, the right to marriage, and say that the dignity influence to all these other issues, but cannot reconcile striking down Article sections 162 and 165 of feedback from the basis of marriage clause in the Constitution. Because the Constitution says marriage is between a person of people of opposite gender, so female and male. And so let's say if you extract 162 or 165, you're in a way trying to take it to the part of liberalizing marriage. And that refers the court refused to strike down the clauses and it's not an appeal. And to end that, because our time is up, we've seen other places in Africa, as Botswana, courts have been looking at this issue in decriminalizing those provisions that were introduced during colonial times. So there's been some movement within the continent, not fully, not to the peace what we at this time. So I think Botswana and I think the West one should be revisions these provisions in decriminalized. And I will leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine. Sorry, I was unable to communicate with her. This seems to have gone off. Okay, I apologize for that miscommunication. We were unable to communicate with her, but I was allowing her to finish her thread of thoughts because she brought in very interesting scenarios of human rights. That is where we are seated right now. It's our concern, justice, governance. We're able to see how the cases, the ongoing cases, bleed into what we are discussing. For me, from where I sit, I see facilitation. I see it more progressive than anything else. And of course, we've got the Constitution leaning in that direction. But I had wanted to stop Christine at the point where she was saying, is religion allowed to limit sexual expression? And I'm going to bring in Godfrey Adera to see, to discuss, give us some theological background on that. Godfrey Adera, can you hear us? Before I close with Dr. Tibet. Godfrey? Godfrey? Godfrey, you can give us a sign. We need signs in these times. Ms. Nekesa, if I were to switch from Godfrey to Dr. Chebot, would that cause a problem? Godfrey's there? Godfrey?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you, yes.
I'm struggling to hear you.
All right.
Thank you now.
I wish I could stand in front of you and see my eyes, but I wanted to see this. I just wanted to just give us some theological perspective and look at sexualities. And to answer the question, can religion relate to just religion is sexual expression? If you can speak to those two issues, I'll be happy.
Thank you so much. Good question. So I will begin first of all by introducing to us why theology, and religion in particular, is very important in this discourse that we're having this morning. Number one is that religion is a social institution that we cannot ignore. Basically, I've said this many times that religion has power to convey and to convince. This kind of power needs to be interrogated and checked. So in relation to gender and sexualities, religion provides what we call the software that shape public discourses. This software is what I call theology. So the resources that a vast majority of us in Africa have for engaging in discourses is religion, religious themes, religious texts, religious narratives. I work with an LGBTQI+ church in Nairobi. One time we did a survey in Nairobi city and asked people anything they would say about LGBTIQ+ lives and identity and expressions. 80% of Kenyans only use religious narratives. None of them, or very few, have the knowledge. They know what the law says, but then expect something to utilize in getting the conversation. So even the conversation, religion is playing the key role in framing having discourses about gender and sexuality. So human rights language and field and framing is not usually legal language. But religious scripts and texts, religious narratives exist in the four areas of life, and so people use them easily. Therefore, religion finds culture as an easy ally and willing partner in curating social stigma and discrimination based on gender, sexuality, and sexual orientation. Anti-rights, anti-gender, anti-equality narratives of religion and cultures are softwares that enable them. So if we seek to make gender equality, justice, non-discrimination, and even reality, then we must engage the software of religion. Let me go to theology briefly, and I want to say that theology does not come from heaven. Theologies are constructed and passed on from one period to another. And I think the best speaker today alluded to that and cited theologians in antiquity in his reflection. So theologies are not don't come from heaven. They are given, they are constructed, they are produced, they are given. Such constructions are not done in a vacuum. The connectedness of such constructions with power, with culture, with worldviews cannot be underestimated. Theology, like history, is always written or constructed by those with privilege and power. Such constructions have named and assigned particular status to people and places with the interest of the powerful and those with privileges. For example, I will give examples briefly. So these are very traditional, conservative, and hierarchical theologies constructed from the point of privilege and a point of power to many others. Whereas in the Old Testament, the Jews are already constructed as chosen and in the elect of God. And so this justifies lots of occupation of islands that we see in the Old Testament. This is because of the construction of the Jews as the elect of God, when there's the rest beyond the Jews. In the time of Jesus comes to a place that religion or theology has constructed hierarchies. Others belong, for example, Jesus for the Jews first, then Gentiles, then the rest of the world. So in one time of Jesus, even theologies begin to construct and form hierarchies. So it's now Jesus begins to rapture those hierarchies, and I would say that's in the moment. Coming to Africa, Missionary theology named Africa as a place where people who had no God because they were not rational enough. Like Africans did not have the rational ability to conceive the idea of God. So, because that we see in Africa already comes the construction and ruling of Africa in a particular way. And so this construction from which are produced a narrative and members in hierarchies, varying boundaries to the creation borders. African theologies emerged largely in the 1950s in tandem with the quest for independence in African countries. And so theologies that have been called inculturation or liberation or black theologies in South Africa emerged in response to missionary theologies. However, there was still a problem with these theologies. These theologies that emanated from African worldview, from African cultures, restitute African cultures that were destroyed and erased by missionary theology, also came from a point of power and privilege. Male voices that were enabled by African patriarchal cultures became the norm of these theologies. Women voices became invisibilized. Until in 1989, when the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians, the Organization of African Women Scholars, African Women in Church, and African Women in Academy, was formed in Ghana to open the door for African women theologies. So these theologies had gender, sexuality, and African situations of poverty, diseases, etc. as subject matter in theological inquiry and articulation. And so that's the background of where how theologies have been constructed, how we have come to where we are today. Currently, there are two strands of theology that I want to raise as I finish. There's one that I've called before as patriarchal, conservative, traditional, hierarchical theologies that have continued to be passed from one history to the other, from one generation to the other. It still exists in different forms based on the context where it is found. Those theologies to me exist, and they have named homosexuality, they have named gender diversity as something pathological, something problematic, something that needs to be addressed. And that's why the emergence of conversion therapy for people who identify as segregated minorities in many African countries, because theologies have named them as the other, as people who reflect the language in African and Christian, Hawaiian, taboo. The theologies that are used first language and therefore to justify issues of conversion therapy and children. Also, these meta-narratives of theologies have found their way into political rhetoric and also their way into many concerns of our countries. For example, in Uganda, the first of the state of Uganda, the implementation bill that came this year. And if you listen to conversations that were around that bill, it was based on the media's narratives and language that this thing is not African. This thing is not Christian, is around. Now, these narratives actually exist in African spaces is what we call prayer theologies. Basically, theologies that are counter narratives, counter mobilizations against the meta narrative. And what those counter narratives look like, they still remain invisibilized, they still remain demonized, they still remain other, and they exist. Where people who identify as gender and gender minorities want to curate their own theologies to assert their belongingness in African cultures, their belongingness in African religious context. They use theology to assert their visibility, their livability in a context where culture, faith, and religion are conspired to assign them otherness and unbelongingness. So as I conclude, I introduced this conversation to multiple theologies. We have listened to meta narratives. We have listened to constructed hierarchical theologies that have been given to us. It's time also to shift and look at the other theologies that remain invisibilized. One of my famous scholars in African theologies of gender is a lady called Marcia in South Africa, so in Uganda. In one statement, she makes that theology is not something that we receive. Theology is something that we wrestle with. And so we invite this panel this morning to also come to that space of wrestling and acceptability of queer theologies, of queer stories that remain invisibilized. I just came close my initial thoughts and looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for awakening our theologies in that direction. We want to, can you hear me?
Okay.
Is it okay? Can you hear me now? No?
The lady.
This happened like, can you hear me now? Okay, thank you, Benji. I think I want to translate to hierarchies, to the fetish. I like the fact of individualism because that is really narratives and to as alternative sexual identities. I want to be fair. South Adventurers of the saying to bring in Dr. Jeffries, and I would like her to ask a question on aspect sexualities. How would she, as a woman, she was subtle of concerned African, see this conversation that we're having here in terms of tradition, perspectives, and values? Feminists, those sociological circles see this conversation as necessary or as unnecessary, because remember, Adela has said that 80% of Kenyans their understanding of sexualities based on religion. So religion has a real voice, but is it functional in this time and space? Progress over time. Hello, Dorcas. We're trying to contact you from Earth to space.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I want to take this time to really appreciate the presenters who have gone before me. My presentation is based on human sexuality, sacred texts, and human dignity. At the core of everything, we must speak about human dignity from the perspective of human sexuality, and at the center of everything is the issue of sacred texts. We are told that since the beginning of creation, God has revealed the intention for humanity when it comes to sexual identity and sexual intimacy. We use the Song of Songs as an Old Testament midrash on matters, sex, and intimacy to put into perspective the issue of human sexuality, sacred texts, and human dignity. This is done from the context of Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, where God has created all human beings in God's image and likeness. Midrash is an expansive Jewish biblical exegesis that reimagines dominant narrative readings. Yes?
We can hear you. Please go on.
Can I continue?
Yes, please go on.
Yes, Midrash is an expansive Jewish biblical exegesis that reimagines dominant narrative readings of biblical texts to offer counter ways of interpreting biblical texts to stand alongside, but not to replace, former readings of the Bible. When one reads most of the Old Testament texts, their interpretations, human sexuality has constantly been presented as a vice that needs to be feared, lest it lead someone to hell, denying God's people the opportunity to enter heaven. When one reads some biblical texts such as Genesis 19 on the issue of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and Romans chapter 1 verse 26 to 27, where God gave humanity over to shameful lusts, it is possible to fear the pleasures of human sexuality. However, in the Song of Songs, one finds a possible counter-narrative of the dominant negative representations of human sexuality in the Old Testament. The Song of Songs in particular that we shall be reading today is the Song of Songs chapter 7 verse 6 to 14, where it is written, "How fair and pleasant you are, loved one, delectable maiden, you are as stately as a palm tree, and your breasts are like its clusters. I say, I will climb the palm tree and lay hold of its branches. Oh, may your breasts be like cluster of the vine, and the scent of your breath like an apple, and your kisses like the best wine that goes down smoothly, gliding over lips and teeth. That pleases my lover, rousing him even from sleep. I am my lover's, he longs for me, only for me. Come my way, beloved. Let us go out into the fields and lie all night among the flowering henna. Let us go early to the vineyards. There I will give you my love. In this particular text, we encounter an expression of the intimacy, sensual love, and encounters without shame. Expression that does not deny one the opportunity to enjoy the pleasures of the dignity of human sexuality. They are sexing even in the woods, in the valleys, wherever, enjoying in the public and in the private sphere, even in the house of the mother's chamber. So sexual identity and human sexuality cannot be separated from the issues of human dignity. According to Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, God created human beings in God's image, male and female, giving all human beings an inherent value, dignity, and eternal significance. Underscore the words inherent value, dignity, and eternal significance. Thus, no one has the right to take away the dignity of any other person, regardless of his or her, or their sexual identity or status. While speaking about compromised sexual selves and violated orientations, Jeremy Pons argues that the importance of talking about human dignity in relation to sexual identity has become or is an urgent issue and can therefore not be seen as a subsidiary discourse which has to be postponed until issues of race, poverty, HIV, and maybe corona have been dealt with. In many African societies, sacred texts are at the center of religion and sexuality. While there is a complete absence of written scripture texts or holy sacred texts in African contexts, oral traditions are passed down from one generation to the other through folktales, songs, and festivals. They also include beliefs in spirits and higher and lower gods, sometimes including a supreme being, as well as a veneration of the dead and use of magic and traditions. When we speak about use of magic, sex is at the center. When we speak about issues of death, sex, ritual cleansings through sex is also at the center. That is why I say interestingly, at the center of the sacred texts such as the veneration of the dead, magic, through ritual cleansing or during planting seasons in some communities, it is a strong aspect, the strong aspect of sex and intimacy is actually celebrated. Cultural norms are used to prescribe the ways in which the sexual performance are done in order to bring harmony, prosperity, and tranquility to the society. The interpretations of biblical texts that portray sexuality negatively find a fertile ground in this same context of oral African texts. In Genesis 2:23, Adam says, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." It is possible to argue that sex is the highest expression of the divine. That is why in the Song of Songs chapter 1 verse 2, a woman initiates sexual encounters without shame by commanding her beloved to kiss her with the kisses of his mouth. And in the Song of Songs chapter 5 verse 1, the male lover tells his male colleagues to also enjoy and celebrate the sensuality of the beauty of human sexuality. This is after eating from his honeycomb and enjoying the beauty of human sexuality. So, because sensual love is stronger than death, as indicated in Song of Songs chapter 8 verse 6. So at the heart of the culture of violence towards the LGBTQI plus community is the fact that sex is a taboo subject in many patriarchal settings. So Africans are notoriously religious. Thus, most religions such as Judaism, Christianity, Islam find a smooth landing ground in African religiosity. In these religions, sacred texts and traditional interpretations have historically been used to affirm and endorse a patriarchal heterosexual normative approach towards human sexuality. It also has a strong aspect of power and dominance over the partner, which is why, jokingly, I'll joke about it, when men are speaking with the power about their power in sexual progress, they will speak about it from the perspective of a man sleeping on top of a woman to indicate that he is dominating over a woman. And so when other sexual orientation are spoken about, they start to fear of the power being taken away from the person who is supposed to dominate the other. And you will hear even when it comes to issues of urinating, for example, they will say a woman urinates while bending and a man urinates while standing to indicate power and dominance over men. So the interpretations favor exclusively penetrative vaginal intercourse between men and women within the boundaries of marriage over all other forms of human sexuality, therefore controlling and dominating narratives on human sexuality. Culture, religion, sacred texts, and sexual violence. The culture of violence towards LGBTQI plus communities should be understood from the context of teachings reflective of rape myths and traditional abuse regarding gender and sexuality. When we go to the text of Genesis chapter 19, for example, these men of the city wanted to rape the angels of the Lord. It was non-consensual sexual encounter, and that is how it should be understood. And therefore, I strongly affirm that sex is the highest expression of the divine that every human individual being has the right to enjoy. All we need to do is to steer sex dignity talks that enables God's people to enjoy human sexuality as a gift from God, as expressed in the Song of Songs, which I consider a midrash of the negative presentation of human sexuality in the Old Testament. So, the starting point is to steer sex dignity talks that unpack ways in which religion uses sacred texts to silence sexual minorities, get experts in interpretations of sacred texts who are familiar with the original languages of sacred texts to help put proof texts into context. We conclude by saying it is important to use the voices of the marginalized to speak for themselves, with themselves, to read sacred texts for themselves, with themselves. Those who have encountered the text of Luke chapter 4, verse 1 to 13, when Satan tempted Jesus, Jesus constantly said, when Satan said, if you are the Son of God, take this stone to become bread. Jesus would constantly answer and say, it is written. Unfortunately, in many African contexts, Christian contexts, we will say the Bible said. We will not say it is written. So I conclude by imploring on all of us to read scripture, not to hear that scripture says. I open up the opportunity for further discussions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chebet, for romanticizing it all. Actually, you have made it very romantic. I have not considered. I'll go back and read it. We have really stressed on dignity of human pleasure and basically also say, but we have thank you. So what Chebet has said is we have no right, we basically have no right to speak against or criminalize sexual minorities and their preferences. And coming from the religious texts, I think really we are not just for what we're left with is we have in our minds all those who are marching on the streets and saying, kill them, crucify them because they are anti-that we know. She has set the stage for us, our understanding of the right as a right to play that makes of the power and the proposed strategies of bad stuff and stands to do. And of course, we ask ourselves as Kenyans, so what is better than doing that? That's a question we can ask ourselves. So thank you so much for that. Of that, the question that time. I just want to close and summarize the star Professor Esther Manda, if you any Professor. Professor Esther, some words of wisdom to close the discussion on African sexualities. Professor Esther Member, can you hear me? Professor Esther? Professor Esther? Professor Esther Member? Professor, give us a sign. Yes, you want to speak? Yes, Professor. Please, I'm sorry about the technological hitches. I'm trying to cue you in to giving us a round of understanding of your perspective on African sexualities, very generally, speaking as a senior in the academy, and strongly makes sense in circle of concerned African women, religions. We recognize your business and therefore ask you to speak on African sexualities. About 2 minutes, and I will be happy. So I thank you very much, but you were here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to add my voice to the voices that have been spoken, the voices that have spoken before me. And that I've spoken, especially from the theological perspectives, have got to fulfill the voices of the circle for sound African women theologians who widened the space to talk about the lived realities of the people within society, not to talk about religion and God in abstract terms. The subject under consideration is a very important subject, partly because it forms some of the ways in which we marginalize the voices of other people. I think the notions that homosexuality, the notion that this is an African is also wrong. The notion that it is un-Christian is also wrong. The notion that it is unbiblical is also wrong. And the people who have spoken before me have proved that. My comment at the moment is to say, why is it that we are very keen on marginalizing, discriminating, and excluding? We have to look at our context and see who is it that is quite ready to do that to the other human beings. Of course, issues of power and privilege, as we learned, Reverend Adera, are very true. Also, issues of people using subjects that they think are emotional in order to deny us talking about the real questions. When does issues of homosexuality come? They come up when we can't face up to the lived economic realities, the lived social realities. Also to divert our attentions, we go into
sexuality that we think is emotive. As African women theologians, really argue strongly that this thing should be put on the table. Issues around culture that kills, issues around poverty that destroys, issues around health that kills. So instead of diverting, because we're talking about sexuality, we talk about hunger, we talk about floods, we talk about other things. We talk about human beings and their sexuals. Human beings are total human beings. So rather than us dismembering people and looking at their ways of sexuality or what is done in terms of sex, is to talk about what makes the human beings whole. And that is what Dr. Shebet has put. What is human dignity? And what Adela has said. Why do we think theology is something that comes from this? Why is it not that which we struggle with every day? So theology is talking about floods today. What is the theology of the floods today? That is the real issue. To bring up issues of family as if family has always been what we see today is wrong. Family in Africa has been diverse. And I like the person who talked earlier about children and marriage between women. But that is the way Africa lived and acted on issues that affected people. What answers did they offer? So we should be looking for answers other than condemning, excluding, and discriminating. Those are just my thoughts off the cuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor. Excellent way to round off the panel discussion. But when you're discussing African sexuality, it's about inclusion. We include each other. We belong together. We talk about what makes a human being whole. We don't use texts to point out realities that are divisive, but rather texts to bring us together to converge our ideas as human beings. And Professor Esther has summed it up beautifully. I couldn't find better words than that. Sexual behaviors, identities, not muting our voices, but rather elaborating them and realizing that in Africa, we are diverse. Our sexualities are diverse. It is Africa, and Africa is sexual. We are as sexual as we are sensual. And I think that is what I would like to close the panelists' thoughts on, whether they were legal, whether they were social, whether they were religious, and whether they were political, because I think Dr. Shilabuka took us to some politics right there. We realize that African sexuality, like he said, is more complex than we imagine. And I think, judging from our first speaker who set the ball rolling, Professor Owiti, that, the Greeks we have to thank the Greeks for making us see that there is more to a person than just body and bone and mind, but that there's an emotion and expression inside that person that gives them an identity. So as we sit here and talk about African sexualities, there are traditions, we have created perspectives, and the human rights are evident in the words of Nkonge, who was saying that we have set social justice in place through the Constitution of Kenya 2010, and minority rights are real, and by our being here, we're legitimizing that. I open the space for Q&A by passing the mic to Dr. Kibingichi to continue in running the questions and answers. I hope the questions are there. You can stand up and stretch a little bit.
And can we note we can't hear you from the online participants? We can't hear anything.
Okay.
So you're taking questions and answers will not be able to know what is being.
Thank you for that. So not that she can hear what I said, but thanks for that. Okay.
Okay. That echo.
Can they hear? Can they hear us?
Can you hear me? The online audience and participants, can you hear me? As we off with this section, I just want people to reflect as they talk about it and clap for them. But we still have these panelists here. I will wish that Professor Kakumu come back here so that when they ask questions, you can respond to them. And I would like you to reflect as you ask these questions. First of all is the issue of language, which Dr. Shalabu used to. Does the Bible also have the word homosexuality? Does it have the word lesbian? So that should, so as we ask whether there's such a word in African language, does it also exist in the Bible? Secondly, in the Bible, we seem to encounter the word sodomy. We encounter the word sodomy, which basically refers to anal sex. Do we in African language have the word for anal sex? Or are we denying the fact that there was no anal sex in Africa? And I'm interested in that. And remember at the beginning, I also asked this. Sexuality. How it was done. Where it is done. So the biblical verse that was read started with the lips. The kissing. So when you talk about the relationship, meaning almost something that comes into marriage. But are we thinking about acts that Africa is devoid in the form of encounter that will make sexual when it comes to homosexuality? Ladies and gentlemen, and since we're dealing with gender and queer sexualities, queer gender, I think when I say ladies and gentlemen, maybe not inclusive. Yes, come to ask question and talk about it. But then thank you, Dr. Kinengichi. First of all, let me thank the panelists for a very great thoughts seminar. But I want to start to talk slow and slow indicated. When you talk about Africa's sexualities, what is it that we are living into? We are saying that Africans are less human, and we're then comparing Africans against who? Who is the other man in the Bible? And is it therefore possible that our traditions can come back then to clearly look at how we live? And we have some things that we are saying that we are reverting to Africanism. That's an important to remember to justify somebody is trying to let us not do. But more importantly, the use of language, therefore, has been very characteristically and human rights. Whether we talk about sexuality in the domains of human rights, was to talk, you are told you are academic, you are an Christian, you are an African, you are against the law of nature, you are an liberal, an humanistic, and really, all these buzzwords are simply meant to make us believe that the expression of sexuality is unreal. And other than that, that individuals should be able to be controlled. I like one of the speakers who said, at what level then do you realize you control somebody within their own sphere? Is it that you are linguistically more moral? And in that linguistic morality then ruins the point. And therefore, legislate things like women. Because women is different about women than men. I like giving examples to my students that when we talk about medical condition, I know in this country that we make the law of the only circumstances of the but unfortunately, that will not be true from the entire application base. That's the circumstances. I think here as a condition, for instance, but someone example of the medical condition, the way in which the laws of community are taken out. Compare that with FGM. For FGC, and the rate at which changes have been very slow to come by. It also doesn't bring the issue. I was there, even to the country of Turkey. But what about matriarchal societies? I don't know an example. I know how to some of these guys. Okay.
Some that you think you want to live in a better system. And to look at a lot of practice means to this, so very, very much doesn't know. Not seriously, sexuality with experiential context that you. I'm sorry again to go into the debate of engaging. You invite me some man which I didn't want to go to. He doesn't want to tell us whether we're going to follow annual side and whether that will qualify as homosexuality or not. If anyone else with a question, please, I ask you to come forward, since this table will not extend up to there. Yeah, so start moving closer to the mic.
Hi everyone. It's okay. Hi everyone. My name is Fidel Castro. My question goes to, it's relating to Madame Dorcas debate. She was talking about something to do with domination, where she was saying that a man being on top and a woman down there means that men are overly dominant. So my question is just to a bit dispute it in a way, because we are talking about sexuality, and that means that men are domineering. So if you do a survey, for instance, when it comes to sex, there are always styles in sex, and some of these women, you realize that, for instance, there's something called missionary that a big number of them like so much. So I don't know why we want to crucify men for something that women themselves so desire. So I just like to say, my question is just saying that we are talking about sexuality, and we're saying that men are dominating in a way by, you see, that kind of style. So I was to dispute that. And then we go to also to Steve Broadcast. She talked about something to do with the Bible, being hypothetical about the gender in something. If you look at the Sodom and Gomorrah, I think what is the just talked about, there was something sodomy. Actually, that is, I think, where the word sodomy came from. The whole community was banished, the whole city, because they were engaging in very funny sexual behaviors. I don't think it's because of the gender and something, because the word lesbianism and all that, I don't see that anywhere in the Bible. Otherwise, thank you.
And I hope the question is going to the issue is the relationship between sex and dominance. And is especially sexually, in great comes to use only the hard to sex. I hope that means says they will improve. Yes, yes, okay. So that was like the domination we were talking about. So one was a law, and the other one was a pension. Right now, so one for just require the graduates of fire terribly understand their concept. And the last question before reaction from the team.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Michelle. I'm quite happy that we have set in this country. I mean, I think to can become a lot. Because of sexuality, I want to learn that we can more examples within the toxic and successfully it speaks it. Right, so yeah, he was so live again. Very little the example of sexuality as a whole team. I would say it's just talked about private colonial examples that most security the LGBTQs from that community. So I'm just talking about the time. It's a gentleman you story and make you the talk. I talked about all these things. Not something that you are talking about in terms of the countries. and African countries. This countries was like for just curriculum of works. I will have it to most of the examples we gave were other than helping examples. It's really good if you're talking about sure more African examples. Make sure the only one we talked about the Masawi and the Mali and the people. So if you want to talk about which was example from the constitutions. Because this romance was about the movement initiation, which existed in many cultures, even in the poor communities, and talk about this to be justice, about just social reality. That's when, just quickly, there's another one, I'll quick, I just want to, yeah. Yeah, it's in the spiritual African culture, it should be with more of what do you call it? Yeah, so just call and response, yeah? So, I remember this, right? Yeah. So, once when someone called Geoffrey was talking about religion, should separate African culture, which was more spiritual, and not to many religions, yeah? So, a lot of it was just about the rituals and the sacrifices, yeah? There are groups where there's a little bit we talked about being total, which was a matter of economics, not even animals do the same, yeah? So we shouldn't be using a dog to raise one of its economics or something. So we shouldn't be looking at it for, yeah.
The commentary firstly giving that you're asking a question, that's where I'm telling you. Is it asking a question or you give your comment?
It was more of a comment.
But you're adding a comment.
Oh, okay.
So you give the reference.
I think we are nice getting back after this. So that we should get all this being asked. So we are choosing back to them. So, respond to whichever aspect you're bringing in regards to an area. With the professor about patterns and how it's led to sexuality and partnerships. Maybe for last the person here, I will have learned where we do that. But I like this. What situations of usually the last year, where usually people get from the person, right? And also, the sexuality dynamics further is further developed in terms of gender issues. This matters mostly in Central West Africa, Cameroon, from Nigeria, and Ghana, Bangladesh, from Nigeria. And then also intelligence goes to the children and children from the side. And kids as well, and get so other issues, the one I'm asking about. But I know what is sufficient for students and for them. It's just very much of them. First, the one can make up hands from the main set that we can do. Was a just somehow yeah, where if you're focused on the world and to make as much as possible until sort of time when we read. Most of the Lord was the man and vows to as much as possible until we are what. So it's just
not affecting the men. He was sufficed. While chastity is affecting the women, was sufficed. So those are some of the levels of first pregnant. But when so much happens in failure with building, this is universal. And there was something happens with this North Africa. Because we were not out there to see what happened to our body. Isn't it? But how many percent people are about it? So, most of the I was also sure that African was yes. That's a very different issue. But I would feel like Africa shows because the speaker of Africa. And it could be don't speak for Africa. So we don't Africa as a show to Africa should be practiced and African from other spheres. African I'll take you. I think I would say it's something which has mental commentators were telling me more about messaging of money and first person saying that it was to look at some nuances. But nuances in these things because also one is very missionary style. And which means it may not be the African style. It may need that African and also the and missionary is involved it is some other and we are saying this is largely things we are not even with the knowledge that things because the sensualities and just going on. Well, even when we look at what you're talking about post, the women kinds of women and these women have agreed in that segment culturally. And so you look at it that because merchandise and things so that when you have a young lady, the best must be because we are really she's really she doesn't see you. She wants to need to see that in that person. But what things need for me? But if it means that it is going to reflect so very much what see me. And when she goes in the compass, she changes into an actor. So that's what you not just saying that my mind is blessing with the culture society is oppressing her and not allowing her to express herself in the way she wants to express herself. Thank you very much. I don't know whether there is anyone online who wants to spend something. I'll give the mic to Samuel. So something will follow after the okay. I was told by the presentations and Professor Colonial, you are very right. And I also noted that Dr. Shirama didn't even read his notes. He just presented off the cuff. I was very illuminated. And the presenter the equal question, really, it has to be very brief. Notice that the presenters, apart from the lawyer in Congo, were given to referring to these alternative sexualities as homosexual. And in terms of human rights, because these are human rights conventions, I would use that term. Homosexuality is like a labeling. It is an othering, to use post-colonial terminology. It's othering. It's a good. So I would have liked to, one, find out the reason why in this meeting where we are discussing rights, the presenters preferred to use a terminology that is limiting and othering. And number two, to find out whether they might want to protect themselves by adopting friendlier and forward-looking human rights immunology. Thank you.
I don't know whether they were invited was anthropologists or human rights movement. So, I'm also assuming that perhaps we are different environments for different disciplines. So, I know in that sense, by allowing that. Is there another question from audience? I know hunger has already started affecting people. So we need to know the stomach about to take on. The morning, if you want to do so, let's start to turn the rest of the voice. When I think it's been done, we have a significant books. A lot of the statutes, this shown it's professional and that each of the sort of nations we have into so how do we move this organization? What are some of the electoral strategies that this is coming to this is need for new was so it has been taking strategies into them. Then we look at disciplines that they can look straight on one of these conditions because it's must take down we have to work on the issues talking about how we should do it. Because we must stand up and watch it it's perfect during this conversation function. So how do we mobilize this conversation? What would be once the administrates with this the biases and the students to the biases and these conditions so that we can that's going to avoid the pressure like the decision for me like it's kind of the decision not just because it was probably moving the decision but everyone is not what we learn from the situation so this can happen to each other that when he's comfortable by the thing why we can talk about sense that's a very interesting conversation and question and penalty. For us, after what's a fail, which is unfortunately it doesn't get to maintain problem. Certainly, we can be working but only definitely the usual doctors of unity. So the people that we must bring is for the person who wants to help. You know what I'm saying? So we are saying is last boy what I was to feel with sharing about stakeholders to sharing most of the stress with it. I also want to make it travel the wishes to point to so this is now of Muslims. Look at the biggest sense of the previous around you. You have to see processes extraordinary for services. I don't think that's what to for services. So when you have to learn how to sustain these things and share very thoroughly. Is that okay? Some you might have been stressed. Sexualities. We seem to have picked for a number of perspectives to talk about for them now. And even the two wide like we have seriously separated one and one and then again is the time. So this should not be really. So we have a series of great and working in those different aspects as we move on. Really, I think when we question about the sense of the subject, it's also in production. So what's the way is senses not having the misunderstanding, but the things being done. And you to get some assistance from a reality. Sometimes to learn what you don't understand. What do you
He was actually looking at me becomes the man that's it. Where we look at glasses, we look at my glasses. Already good against the actions of the same was. And that's how should understand what the sessions in certain issues. And those actions so the same thing. We don't have session we can talk about and not subjects. And we such sessions when we say not me. We don't have things and the meeting was saying, I'm not saying certain one, then we have to discuss these issues more. So, as a way of bringing to us the children, is able to like to make the ways that they are necessary for the Adora. I can see Adora is always speaking. I know it's been such a I like what you were saying. And so, as well, globally, I think well, to result of Colonial saying, really. Once we settle in others, we might be able to do what if you want to do this. Yes. Okay, so I was saying thank you so much for this is of the sessions. So sessions are because respect here. Let's just say, governance as a way of reflection actually. The one thing which you is the session items also the translation here. Inside as the distribution. When you see lots of position, it's something it's language was the it's a language you don't just when I was going. You can sure. But it's the session constitution which I face to my question. I put on first to say that it's times it's not bad times and the even my first the other is kind of most insurance to this learning discussion. We have to remind that it's a challenge about so what do you think the jobs are something the picture of the answers. You have to love him for doing it's it's even not to give us this to feet. Because sexuality has its potential. It's just to feel it's possible. It's really good to be idealized now. Gospel, inspiration, it's time to this. Just expressions. So, out in space, sense if when strict and reference, so it's always seems that's starting to positive and clear. We start careful things like yes, and that's the
Thank you so much. Sure, it's a move. So sure, central the sound does sound to be something. It's not for the gas this social stuff. This is sure to be positional high. It's interesting. I start to learn about the things I just was so too much about just being sure this to speaking as the countries of the sociality and wishes some years officials. On one thing on the side of just the countries of Chicago sociality social movement. What pure system in the of pure systems which is short to us from the French. How this is what I'm just to compare some trauma and have trauma that has this one that is charging trees. You have to, brand which actually has a full themselves and so much as a but also success and social. So this conversation was doing something we had. This conversation should be following my sisters of society, counselors or environment or internal access to our conversations so that you can come to show consensus issues. So experiences of happening so much so that is what I'm going to transfer. Constitution was something I think and I also think was attempted to sit on the city. What you can write has the question of the situation. Last freedom of expression, which has changed the social desires and sort of tolerance. That has to choose the education of this. And I just don't choose the certain education. So once we see the speaking of this person, what is the people from behind certainly the children when we socialization, sexual education.
Okay, thank you. I think that we presented enough this online because this really knowledge is so have a session on this controversy. So I don't want us to get into that, right? But now as you know, and before I take accounts to talk, that's why I'm session already taken before most of the so you are saying you have a should not be much of the competence of to have in the job. Imagine using learning. I like communities in the center. This is not the so originally our communities not just the like everyone express according to I like the more and has more yes like in our communities. People even design for our media. So I in the world. So I'm explaining the ratio. One of my conversions.
This one is complexion. So that's what I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who has contributed to this important discussion. My name is Manwale, and that is my maximum assumptions based on the complexion. And that is correctly. So I work with an organization called First Indigenous Culture in North Africa. That's the language this has taken over. governmental organization which is very keen in promotion and protection of human rights. We are very keen on conservation of human equity. And we exist for the same reason that I'm saying today. It exists to build pivotal conversations is this. It exists to make sure that conversations is crazy at times are just what runs ensuring human equity are happening in the spaces. So I think that the community is one of the spaces where it's supposed to allow open discussions without people having enough time to kind of reaction. So being able to intellectualize this conversation and having opportunities to follow. So below wants to speak to development stage. We have shared time to in this and in India, I want to take this opportunity to appreciate intelligence through an industry to prepare and remedy it, and such people have been very instrumental in making sure that this happens. And I want to appreciate and navigate to the Center for Human Rights. I have a special relationship with the center because that is where I acquired my master of human rights. So just that I'm here. Exact things that I was taught to do when I was in the Center for Human Rights. And I'm great with discussions, continue my picture and to the repeating from the standard. This has been heavy eyes. Just much steps that I'm sitting here, just remembering the responsibility, it's like society, website about in this the center and having a quite. So thank you so much, Dr. Shimabuha. Thank you so much, Dr. Kimmy. I enjoyed the question. This was my job security. So I can mention you by name. You and friends. Now I have like a homework. I don't know what all the things can but I thank you so much, the University of Manchester fraternity for and becoming leading us as the expectation that I think is going to have such a conversation. Thank you so much, and let us interact within the course of the day. Wow.
Thank you. She's speaking about it doing and the same time also keeping your head so lessons of right? Thank you, guys. So let's appreciate it. I also want to be open about this that you always understand. We fed ourselves, our individual now the next session and for us to look inside on you, take care of our stories. First, language one just as you said, yeah. See, you are not to and then we can use the persons into it. That was it, don't wait.
Yeah, just